Hi everyone, very good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. We will start the webinar. I am Oliver, the co-founder of Fraxtor, and it's my honor to host this webinar. Fraxtor is a blockchain-enabled platform that allows investors to co-invest in real estate projects from all over the world through digitized securities offered on our platform. We provide investors with a hassle-free investment process. Minimum investment quantum can start from as low as 20,000. Unfortunately, we can only onboard accredited investors or institutional investors at the moment. Okay, joining me in this webinar is Mark O. Mark is the Director of Acquisitions and Projects at the asset management firm ZACD. Mark is the business development team lead and has close to more than 20 years of experience. Mark started his career in JTC, where he participated in iconic projects such as One North development and specialized in the petrochemical sector. He was appointed as Business Development Director, heading JTC's office in Doha, Qatar. During this period, he started the Doha office and was instrumental in securing the Egyptian Industrial City project funded by Qatari government. In his 3 years in the Middle East, Mark has secured more than $20 million in consultancy projects. Prior to joining ZACD Group, Mark was with STB and started a joint venture company dealing in energy saving systems. Eventually, he has developed Singapore's first large childcare center in Punggol, which caters to 500 children. Mark is a NUS graduate, graduating with a degree in real estate with honors. Mark will be joining us at the end of my presentation to discuss some of the intricate details of food factories in Singapore. A little housekeeping before we proceed. The webinar is only provided for investor education purposes and should not be misconstrued as an offer of investment or financial and legal advice. You are required to do your own due diligence before making any investment. Okay, today we are going to talk about an interesting asset class that is slowly emerging in Singapore. This is food factories. The COVID-19 situation has shown us how vulnerable our food supply chains are. During the circuit breaker period in April and May, many food factories remain open, continuing to supply retail customers with food and beverage products. I would now like to conduct a quick anonymous poll. These will be some questions pertaining to the food industry. I'm going to launch the poll now. Take a few seconds to key in your answers. Okay, now I'm going through the presentation. So Singapore's population is expected to rise between 6.5 million to 6.9 million in 2030. This will definitely mean more mouths to feed in the coming decade. But at the same time, the world's population is also increasing. The numbers that we got from UN is that we're going to expect 10 billion mouths to feed in 2050. This would mean that our current food supply must be more than doubled in order to feed everybody in the world. That would mean that obviously Singapore, being such a small country, will be more than vulnerable. Singapore currently imports 90% of our food supply from 170 countries. These include vegetables, eggs, fruits, meats, and rice. But our supply chain is being threatened. With the rapid global urbanization and growth, the amount of arable lands are also quickly diminishing. Climate change has also brought about a significant reduction in yields as well as arable lands. More recently, we have also seen how global political tensions and even the COVID-19 can impact our food supply chain. In Singapore, less than 1% of our land area is being dedicated to food production. Singapore currently produces a variety of agricultural products such as eggs, fish, leafy vegetables. Some examples will be tai sin, spinach, kangkong, red snapper for fish, and also eggs. But there are some food products such as mutton, beef, pork, which we still rely heavily on other import partners to supply that demand. So Singapore's 30 by 30 goal was announced pretty recently. This is an ambitious project for Singapore to produce 30% of our food requirements by the year 2030. Some initiatives that the government has given us will be to, be given grants for us to open farms, would be fish farms or urban farms. And also the government has also created an 18-hectare agri-food innovation park where we are able to bring together the brightest minds from our universities as well as industry players to grow Singapore's food supply. And last but not least, part of this innovation will be exploring different types of meat, protein replacement food products, such as artificial meat, you can see in the picture, or even soy-based meat products. So these are some of the very interesting things that are happening in Singapore's food industry. So with all this promising growth potential, and then what we see in the industry space is that prices have been coming down. Industrial investment has not been a very, very good investment in the last 5 to 10 years, mainly because our manufacturing sector is in a decline. But that gives us an opportunity to be able to acquire industrial assets cheap and convert it into a more high-yielding food factories. A little bit about the entire value chain. This is the farm to fork value chain. It involves multiple processes from production of food in farms. This will be growing of crops, rearing of animals, to the processing of such foods into final food products, which are then stored or sold in retail spaces and then finally consumed by the end user consumer. So how do we relate all these, the entire value chain to the real estate market? So obviously for farmland, Singapore does have a farmland being owned by the Singapore Food Authority. So those are available by tender. There are food factories, mostly by JTC, and a very, very small amount of privately held food factories because the permits and licenses are so difficult to get. And also warehouses, so things like storage as well as cold storage before this final end product meets the consumers. And of course, retail spaces that are used for F&B, where consumers can come in to dine at. So this will be in the retail mall. So there are multiple avenues in which real estate plays a part in the entire food value chain. So very importantly, which real estate within this entire value chain actually creates the most value? The answer is actually food factory, because you create a lot more value by processing the meat or vegetables into final end product. And therefore, after that, they are able to be sold off to realize that value. Based on research done by the Singapore Food Authority, so this is all statistics by SFA, multi-story and multi-tier factories are able to exponentially increase productivity of the land. So for instance, for vegetable farms, the median existing local farms is only able to produce 140 tons of vegetables per hectare per year. But in a food factory, when they defined it as a 4-story, 4-tier building, we are able to increase that yield to 2,500 tons per hectare per year. And then if you look at fish, right? If you rear the fish in land-based fish farms, that is the lowest yield, 34 tons per hectare. Or even if it's sea-based, you're only getting 245 tons per hectare. So the amount of value that rearing fish within a farm in a food factory can bring will be 500 tons per hectare. And the last one is a very interesting lab cultured meat. 20,000 tons can be produced per hectare per year. So this is a very, very great alternative to boost our protein food supply in Singapore. So for instance, the opportunity to repurpose and redevelop old general industrial factories into food factory that exists. So for example, we can take a B2 factory, which is, that saw its prime long time ago and now has been dilapidated and left unattended. So these factories are available. And if we are able to repurpose this into a high-tech food factory, and we introduced a lot more technology to boost the yield of the crops or even the fish yield, as well as food processing and manufacturing yields, we are able to lend a new lease of life to such factories. So for example, the fact that we can integrate certain food processes within the value chain into a single food factory. At the top, we have aquaponics. This is where we grow vegetable and rear fish within the same environment. The fish and the excrement from the fish will be processed, and then they'll be used as nutrients for the vegetables. And then the water that is used to for the fish will be used to water the plants. And then maybe downstairs, there can be a food processing factory, which is able to take these raw products and process it into ingredients. And then one level below, you can manufacture food products, maybe canned food, for example, or meals that we can sell to the end user. And because the entire chain happens within the same building, there's a lot of cost savings involved, such as transportation, as well as there will be less wastage during the transportation process as well. So if you look back at the entire food value chain, food factories can ideally take care of the entire food value chain, all the way from producing the food, processing and manufacturing the food, storing the food, and of course, after that, selling the food to the end user consumer. So let's look at the demand and supply. The rise of food delivery services have shifted the focus from F&B outlets to really central kitchens or even ghost kitchens, where food can be delivered directly from a factory instead of being delivered from an F&B outlet. So this has increased the demand for such food factories. Singapore is also seeing a rise in food exports, and most of the food that we export are definitely processed and manufactured within food factories. There's also a move towards innovation and productivity in the food industry, which means that for 1 square meter of space, we're able to produce more just because the technology is getting better and better. So that will increase the yield per square foot of a food factory. And growth of the F&B manufacturing industry is also growing, albeit at a slower single-digit rate, but it's a growing rate compared to the general manufacturing industry. Supply side, we're running out of supply of food factory space. The current 3.68 million square feet of space will be, 80% of that will be completed by 2020, and another 20% will be completed by the year 2023. There are limited amount of space in Singapore that are zoned approved for food factories. Therefore, beyond 2023, there's really not much supply coming into the picture. So why food factories? Generally, the yields of industrial properties are a lot higher, mainly because of the risk involved in the property and also because of the tenure of the leasehold. But generally, food factories can yield somewhere similar to industrial factories, 6 to 7%. Office space and retail space are a lot lower. So if we take an example for Mandai Food Link, which is a food factory, approved food factory, and Mandai Connection, which is just next door, built around the same time with the same amount of lease, what we are seeing is that the food factory commands nearly 30% more value compared to a normal factory. So we definitely know that by repurposing factories into food factories, we're definitely being able to squeeze a little bit more yield from the property. And so what is the sustainability of such food factories? Why is such an asset class so sustainable? It's because it's a defensive asset. And because what we realize in COVID-19 is that when the supply chains start to be cut off because of the pandemic, or even the global political arena, right? They're having some trade war. What we see is that food is definitely a very defensive product. To be able to manufacture it is very important for Singapore, especially if you want to hit the 2030 goal of being 30% self-sustainable. Food in food factories also have a very robust growth. We can expect the growth to continue to increase because of the limited supply of food factories and the growing demand. We also expect cap rates for such food factories to compress, while cap rates of retail office spaces will start to expand, which means that your food factory would tend to grow in value more than any other asset class in Singapore. And also the value proposition that food factories bring about will be that we are able to convert old traditional manufacturing industrial spaces into new food factory. So we're able to give life, new lease of life to this dying asset class. So we have come to the end of the presentation. Do reach out to us if you want, interested to register for an account with us. Now we'd like to invite panelist Mark from ZACD to talk a little bit more about food factories. We're going to turn on the video.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
For joining us. Yeah, maybe we start off with a few warm-up questions, then the attendees can throw in some questions to ask you. So Mark is the expert in JTC properties and also food factories, so you can ask him anything you want regarding this investment product. So to start off, what are some of the requirements pertaining to food factories? Can any industrial factory be used to process and manufacture food?
No, I think not all industrial food factories can be used to become food factories, for the simple reason that Singapore has actually a very stringent standard in regards to the zoning where food factories can be held. If you are close to for example, a petrochemical or chemical plant, unlikely they will give you the permission because of cross-contamination and so pollution. So what, if you say what are the requirements, I think they had with a clear zoning area, must be near already existing food industries so that the whole area is like we call sanitized. That's why to your question, I don't think, or in fact, it is very hard to get a food factory license or permission to be built, simply for this reason.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so so there's a question from the attendee. What is the average occupancy cost and profit margin of these food growing tenants? Maybe you can start by sharing who are the expected tenants of the food factory.
In Singapore, if you look at the buyers of a food factory, traditionally they are the SMEs, those that has been entrenched in the market for very long. They come from various sources right in the food chain. Some are manufacturer, some are processor, some are just storage people. But again, we do see that Singapore, most of the buyers are actually in the better buyers. For example, the Mandai factory that you have been talking about, we have actually gotten has gotten the highest food approval, which is a B2 food manufacturing, so that it actually can host all food companies in the value chain. But we do see that expected buyers will still be the SME buyers, those that would like to own their premises to have security in regards to having a space to do their business during the so-called prolonged period of time. So the expected buyers will still be the SME buyers. But increasingly, we have also been seeing something very interesting, which is that we are seeing food delivery companies actually buying or renting spaces and then start letting out to the some of their so-called central kitchen suppliers. For example, Food Panda, Grab, especially Food Panda. I do see they snapping up some of the premises in the Woodlands area to serve the deliveries to the traditional housing estate. Mandai is actually in a good position to also serve such people, simply for the reason that it is close to Choa Chu Kang, UP, and also Bukit Panjang. So it does serve quite a big household number of households in the area.
Okay, then what is the average occupancy for food factories?
Average occupancy, frankly, if you ask me, I think a lot in the food factories are actually owner occupied. Most of the food factories, especially freehold food factory, is really a lot owner occupied.
I see.
If you look at it, on average, the latent vacancy will probably be in that. Probably now we are looking about, I would say, 5%, the most. 5 to 6%, that's the most. This is like people who bought it as an investment, and they change over to rent to other people. So those are the, what I call that, the transient vacancies that you see. But food factories, if they are being priced properly, seldom they are left vacant.
Okay, how about the profit margin for the tenants? What do the tenants at the food factory, do they make a very steep profit margin? Are there certain tenants that make more profit margin than others?
Maybe I would like to clarify what are the profit margin that the question is talking about in terms of an investor buying the unit and making money from it, or in terms of the food business itself?
Okay, I believe it will be for the tenant, or hang on, occupancy. I think should be for the tenant.
You mean that the tenant, in terms of the business, when they are operating in a food factory, what is their traditional so-called profit margin?
Yeah, because it says here profit margin of these food growing tenants. Also should be the tenants. So the question on the Q&A box.
I am not I'm not in the business, but I will roughly make a guess it's in the 20s.
20%.
20s.
Okay, I have some statistics here to share. So for the Panasonic the Panasonic farm in Singapore, 1,710 square meter farm inside a food factory produces 180 tons of vegetables a year. So if we can backward calculate that is a tremendous amount of food, amount of vegetables. So I would think that the revenue that these food farms are making is really quite substantial in that sense. And using technology and all that, they're able to increase the yield of their vegetable farms. So they're able to produce even more. Okay, so let's focus on the other questions. So how much space does a typical tenant take up in a food factory?
Traditionally, if you're looking at the smaller SME companies, they will be looking at between 1,008 to 2,000 square feet. The bigger ones will be probably looking at about 4,000, 3,000 odd to 4,000. So it is important that when we design the factory, we design in such a way that the smaller buyers can still buy desired units, but if a bigger one, they can actually buy 2 units and combine it together.
I see. So it's a bit flexible. The space will be a bit...
The design has been designed to be flexible so that we can cater to all different classes of buyers.
Okay.
In fact, we also see, maybe I cut in a bit, we have also seen companies buying up the whole floor.
Oh, that's
so
good.
that they control the whole floor and they can base their operations on that floor itself.
Okay. We have another question. Has there been more clarification, elaboration by the government on how Singapore can achieve 30% local food production, change in land use, grants for food companies? So maybe I can take this question. So there are grants available for food companies to hire people as well as to establish the R&D. Change of use in land is not really guaranteed by the government. From what we see, we do not really need so much space to produce the amount of food that we actually need. So the current food factory space that we are looking at is able to produce a lot more per hectare because it's a more intensified compared to agricultural land. And the government has not been very clear on how to achieve 30%, whether is it 30% eggs, 30% vegetables, 30% beef and all that. It could be a mixture so that the entire production is 30%. So it could be 50% vegetable, 50% fish, 20% synthetic meat, for example, so on and so forth. So for the production one, the government, what we have read has not been very clear on how we're going to achieve that. But from what I understand, whatever the government plans to do, they usually are able to achieve this, such as even our population number growing up to 6.9 million. Okay. Okay, we have one more question. Any intent to shift the food factory to neighboring where lands can be specially offered for the food purposes? Any intention?
I think if you look at how the government in Singapore is actually putting forth, it is precisely this shifting of food production to Malaysia some years ago by some of the bigger companies due to the cheaper land, of course, and labor, that is actually causing us this problem today. That when the lockdown started, everybody is scrambling like mad. Yeah, everybody is panicked because like common people will start thinking, oh no, the crossway is closed. Is there any food coming in from Malaysia? Then the government has to come out and so-called reassure people, emphasize that, okay, the line for food will still be coming in and out. So I think that contrary to what has been, like the question is saying, in fact, what the 30-30 plan by the government is that they want actually more and more food so-called independence in Singapore moving forward, rather than shifting more to overseas. Because the border lockdown does present itself a very great problem to everybody. In fact, I do see during this whole pandemic situation, logistics is also a big issue in delivery for many companies.
Okay, I think the question is maybe talking about shifting food factories to the neighborhoods where people live, so we become closer. Is that a possibility?
You do see that the government is encouraging the use of certain spaces in HDB estates to growing crops. But I do not think that these spaces can definitely meet the demand of so-called
the population
on a much bigger scale. You probably, like, for example, they give you a space, you grow your own crops, maybe for personal consumption. But how to commercialize all these things, I think is not so going to be that easy. I will still think that you need a dedicated space with proper planning and proper usage of so-called technology to actually grow crops to a substantial level, to be making it commercially viable.
Okay. We've got one question. Please define food factory.
I think in Singapore, let me try to take this question. In Singapore, food factory is given a few levels. Singapore industrial is actually divided into B1, which is we call light industry, and B2, which is called heavy industry. Food factory for the Mandai project that Oliver has been saying is actually a B2 food manufacturing facility. It means that you can do food you can manufacture, you can process, you can cook. So this is all encompassing. You can also store. You can have your cold room to store your raw materials, etc. So in food factory wise, there's a few layers. So I think if you look at certain B1, they can only be used to do processing and storage. But in the one that you have mentioned, Oliver, this can be used for an all-encompassing purpose. So this is how we define food factory.
Okay, okay. So we have one more question. What would be the optimal exit strategy for an investment into food factories, given the short tenure, compounded if buying and invest in existing property that requires more time to reposition? Okay, I guess this is regarding food factory that has a short lease. My recommendation is, I don't know, Mark, you want to take this question?
I think the question may be saying that what is the exit strategy?
How to exit, how you make money, basically.
I think if we look at we use Mandai as example. Mandai is actually freehold. It gives an investor or whoever is using it, a surety of perpetuity. That means that it will be forever yours once you purchase it.
Yep.
We always see that the price does goes up. If you are an owner of a leasehold industry factory, then of course that gives you you will really be seeing a reduction in terms of the capital value of your unit as the years goes by. More importantly, I think if to exit for an investor, it is definitely worthwhile to look at it if your leasehold is getting less and less, if you are not planning to continue to do your business, to actually sell it and move on. But for a freehold property, I think it's just like freehold residential property in Singapore, right? I think the price will hold. You don't have the time pressure.
Yeah, I think for industrial properties, it's a little bit different from what most investors are very familiar with, which is residential or even commercial retail. Most industrial properties, they come with very, very short leaseholds. And then from our experience, what we have seen is that your yields will be very high. You can get 7 to 10% yields on a very short tenure because you purchase it cheap, right? But at the end of the day, like what Mark said, at the end of the leasehold, you lose the land. So you need to factor in the capitalization portion of that investment. So not necessarily you get a very high, if you get a very high yield, it's a very good investment. That's not necessarily the case. It's just that after the leasehold is up, that's it for your asset value. So for what Mark's project is actually used as an example for this educational webinar. We're not offering anything. His project is a freehold food factory project. To cite another example, Food Concept at Pandan Loop is a freehold B2 food factory. And they are selling freehold B2 food factory for $1,600 to $1,800 per square foot. Out of the 30 over units remaining, yesterday we just checked, they are only remaining with 7 units. That's 1,600. That's even more than a lot of office space and retail space, but it's because it's freehold. The development opposite the road is a leasehold of 30 plus years, and it's going for about $600 to $700. So the comparison will be, if some people do not like to invest in very short leasehold, but investing in very short leasehold can get you a very, very high yield. But you must take into account the depreciating asset that is on your books. But the freehold asset, like what Mark said, it sits after 30 years, it's still yours. You can redevelop it, and it's still going to be a freehold property. So the investment strategy will differ if you are investing in leasehold or investing in a freehold property. Okay, one question: if Iskandar Johor can offer dedicated land banks for special food industry, will that be viable to consider? I think like what Mark mentioned earlier, in the early days where the cheap land was available, Singapore industries went out to do agricultural businesses there. But because of Singapore's food security, suddenly a lot of people are trying to re-enter the Singapore market. So definitely if the land is cheap, we still can invest in it. But what we're talking about today is because of Singapore's food security, we're looking at Singapore-based food factories. And in order for us to attain the 30 by 30 goal set by the government, we definitely need to increase the amount of space that is dedicated to growing food as well as processing food within Singapore. That's where the opportunity lies, not across the causeway. Okay, will some type of new food operator such as insect, plant, meat, cell meat want to have a special factory space? What is the best model to cater? So I think I can answer this. Most food production, if you're using insect-based, plant-based food, if you're producing the food, you definitely need to be within a special food factory. Even if you are synthesizing cell meat, for example, like what you put here, you definitely need a special facility to do this. And like what we have shown earlier, 20,000, if you do synthetic meat, your yield is 20,000 tons per hectare of space. So that is a very, very big yield. So if you're doing synthetic meat, that could be a very, very good business to get into. We may not feel comfortable eating synthetic meat today, but maybe 20, 30 years time, we may be more comfortable in doing that. Okay, another question. I believe there is a difference between vertical indoor farming versus food factory. Food factory is more on processing and manufacturing. Do you see a potential of farming within food factory? I think like what Mark covered earlier, there is nothing stopping anybody from manufacturing or growing food within vertical farms in food factories. Mark, is there any other asset class in Singapore that we can produce or even produce our vegetable through vertical farming or indoor farming?
I think, like I said, it's important in terms of what is the surrounding usages. If you, let's say, you want to dedicate one building or a part of one of your building to do vertical farming, you have to get the relevant zoning requirements right. It's not, like I say from the initial question, it's not all industrial spaces can be used to grow food, etc. You have to be sure that there is no surrounding usages that is will have a conflict with what you're trying to do. Of course, everything is possible, but it is important to actually look at the whole. I will still say, go back to what I stand by. You have to look at the surrounding areas to ensure that you don't have any things.
I think it's by approval process. I think SFA will also look at the site in question and assess whether they are comfortable with giving a license for that particular food factory or not, right?
Yes, correct. It's not only SFA. Singapore has
JTC.
URA will actually go out to all the agencies, which includes SFA, LTA, JTC, etc. So everybody has to have no objection, plus your environment, NEA, etc. Yeah.
Okay. So another question. Understand that the Tai Seng area, there are some freehold food factories. Do you know what is the average selling price per square foot in the area? And
1,900.
1,000.
1,008 to 1,009.
Wow, is that for freehold food factories?
Yes, it's for freehold. Yes.
Okay, and then
because the Tai Seng area is sorry. Continue, please.
I'll just continue the question. And what about food factory pricing in Mandai? Do you think Mandai will price above 1,000 PSF?
Our estimation is actually it's going to be about 1 as of now. Conservatively, definitely above 1, but we are just being be a bit more conservative. We think about between 1 to 1,001 is an achievable target for the Mandai freehold.
Okay, freehold, yeah. Okay, well, we have quite a few questions. Let me just. Okay, historically, which process of the value chain is more common at current food factories? Is it food manufacturing, processing, vertical farming capabilities? Government is also experimenting with urban farming at rooftops of HDB car parks and HDB car parks, sorry. Do you think this will threaten the attractiveness of multi-use food factory investments?
I think end of the day, Oliver, like what we see, you can grow crops at HDB car park or any place in Singapore. But ultimately, you need to have a place to process the raw material. And this is where the food factory comes in.
Okay.
Because if you have, you still need to clean, you still need to process all the raw ingredients. That's why it will still have to be done at a food factory. It cannot be done on site in actually, because we don't have that capability in Singapore. Unlike the agricultural farms that you see overseas, they are actually huge. They can build a factory to process and do everything there and then. But I don't think so for Singapore.
Okay, so actually to add on, so growing crops on rooftops are not as efficient because a lot of the times they have a lower yield compared to if you grow it indoors. One of the primary reason is the availability of sunlight, as well as pests. A lot of pests in the even though you have the green nettings and all that, sort of pests. But because of the constant UV light, what we found online is that vegetables tend to grow faster at a faster rate in vertical farms or even hydroponic farms that are given constant green light and within controlled temperature environments. So not every species of vegetable can survive out in the open sun. Some vegetable species survive better in cooler, air-conditioned climates. Then indoor farms would therefore allow you to grow an even broader variety of vegetables. Okay, we'll just take another 3 more questions and then we can end the webinar. Okay, what kind of bank financing tenor? Okay, sorry, we're not selling any assets here, so I will not. I'm not the expertise to answer that. Hi, what's the reason why B2 industrial asset command lower rents versus food factory? What are the lease terms behind these leases? Triple net lease, and that's why average length of the lease. And what's the average length of the lease? Mark, do you know what's the average length of leases for B2? I'm not very.
That means companies renting, how long will they rent it for?
Yeah.
Typically, they'll rent it for at least, for users, they look at longer rent term because they have to put, you see, when somebody come and rent from an owner of, let's say, a food factory unit, the amount of investment that the tenant has to put in to make it food, whatever food usage that they want to put in is actually quite high. They have to put in, let's say, chiller rooms, if they are doing cooking, all the specialized equipment for commercial grade, not the normal kitchen that you and me are used to.
Yep.
So they will definitely ask for as long a lease as possible. But what we see is that, of course, that when they ask for a longer lease, that means the owner has surety of income. They will try to negotiate the rental slightly downwards. The longer, in short, the longer the leases, the lower the rental that the tenant will be looking at.
Okay. Also to maybe just to share with the attendee also, B2 assets generally, for manufacturing, generally have a lower rent and a lower value compared to food factory, because food factory needs certain permits. Food factories are rare. Therefore, they command a higher value and also higher yields on their per square foot basis if you're comparing a normal B2 with a food factory. So I hope that answers the question. Whether or not it's triple net lease, there is a negotiation up from the landlord to the tenant. Most of the time, factory spaces are triple net or even double net leases. So that is basically for that particular industrial property space, which is not the same for commercial as also residential. One very interesting question that we have: how important is the location of food factories? When selecting one, is the location very important?
I think for food factory location, Singapore-wise, it is more based on what I call historical reasons. When the JTC started industrializing Singapore, food, of course, is one of the so-called industry that they are looking at. So that's why you see the traditional food factory area is in Pandan and Chin Bee, in the so-called the west. Central, you have the Tai Seng and what do you call that, the Paya Lebar, Ubi area. Those are more privately owned because of their central location. And then up where Mandai and Woodland is, you also see a good cluster of food factories. Reason for Mandai and Woodlands, obvious, because of its proximity to the crossway, where they can get the raw materials in. So if you ask me, location-wise, of course, every place can be a food factory, but I go back to the same way. It's better for them to be around this traditional area because they have already their own ecosystem there. So somebody like want to do food manufacturing, he also need ingredients, because the food manufacturing plant still has to get supplies from their suppliers, and most of that you will see they will all be mushrooming around the same area to support each other.
Okay, understand. So one final question: why are there high vacancy in some JTC food factories?
Okay, JTC being the industrial developer of Singapore, they always like to try new technology and of course try new stuff in their factories. Inevitably, this one will lead to a higher cost. Sometimes they build the size. For example, now they have one in Senoko. It's a very good spec factory, wonderful spec factory. However, the size is a bit too big.
When you mean too big, it's per unit size or the?
Yes, per unit size is really big.
It's too big, okay.
Yeah, and also they have actually come out with this new idea of a centralized storage, cold storage system. So the first floor is dedicated to common use storage cold room. And when you need anything, you have to, they will deliver it up via something, via a so-called delegated elevator to your place. But we've been there and talked to some owners why they are there because of the space, but why some of the owners, which we have done some survey, they still prefer, okay, to have a traditional space, and means they do their own control rather than having shared facilities. Another reason I could think of personally is that once a company comes to a certain size, as with all Asian business, they want to own their property. They don't want to continue to. They don't want to continue to rent and to rent
JTC,
because
yeah,
continue to rent from JTC. So we do see that usually those in JTC, of course, they rent the smaller units. They're continuing to be the smaller players. The big players usually will try to move out and have their own so-called space, whether it's leasehold or freehold. So they have surety of the tenancy with them.
So for those JTC space you're saying is too big, how big are they?
4,000 to 5,000 square feet.
So they are so that's why when we what we look in the demand, when we spoke a little bit earlier on the expected tenant, what are they looking in terms of size? You mentioned about 2,000 square foot. Is that right?
Yeah, you see, Oliver, when the size is too big, let's say for example, the smallest one I think is about probably 2,000 plus 3,000. But the thing is that when you use that big size and multiply by the rental that they are charging, end of the day, the owners will feel that I can use this money and pay for my mortgage. I can buy one, right? Why do I want to continue to rent and pay, like say, wow, like you say, 4,000 square feet, they are charging like $3 plus. Every month you are paying more than $10,000 worth of rental.
Wow,
if you can look for a so-called decent space in the private market, that amount probably can help you to service your mortgage.
Yeah.
So I think it's at the end of the day still dollar and cents.
Of course. Okay, so we come to the end of the webinar. We're running out of time. Thank you, Mark, for joining us in this webinar. For the rest of the attendees, thank you for attending this webinar. Do stay tuned for our other webinar. If you're interested in what Fraxtor is doing and what investment products we are doing, do try to sign up for an account online, or even contact us at contact@fraxtor.com, and then we will get back to you appropriately. Okay, I would like to end the webinar here. There is going to be a post-webinar survey. I appreciate if you guys can help me fill up the survey form so that we're able to make the webinar better in the future. Okay, we have come to the end. Thank you. I'm going to end.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Oliver.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.